I used to believe that dignity was something no one could take from you. Not your age, not your illnesses, not even your children. I thought it was something you earned and that it stayed with you, like a good coat in winter. But here I am now, almost 80, a man who once built barns with his bare hands, who stood through snowstorms and hospital vigils and the silent, unremarked heartbreak of losing the only woman who ever saw through his roughness, sitting alone in a creaky house in rural Nebraska, wondering whether that dignity wasn't quietly peeled off me years ago, like wallpaper that no one notices until it's gone. My name is Clarence, though nobody calls me that anymore. Not really. I suppose my daughter still says Dad when she remembers to call, which isn't often. The mailman just says Mr. Turner and leaves my mail on the porch without knocking. The last time someone addressed me by my name with warmth was probably 2 Thanksgivings ago, when my neighbor Helen brought over some cranberry bread. She said, "Clarence, you look thinner," and I nearly cried just from hearing my name come out of someone's mouth like it meant something. Like I meant something. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always just a man who talks to the radio and checks the weather 4 times a day, even though he's not going anywhere. I had a life, a full one. 51 years married to a woman named Joan who made everything softer. The light, the tone of our daughter's voice, even the feel of my own hands when I held them out to her. Joan had a way of smoothing edges. She passed away 6 years ago after a long, bitter stretch of lung cancer. She'd never smoked a day in her life, but life doesn't always play fair. After she died, I stayed in this house because it was the only place where her voice still echoed. In the hallway, in the porch swing, creaking at night, in the way the floor groaned under the same spots we used to stand. I couldn't leave that behind. Not then. Maybe not ever. My daughter, Elise, lives 2 hours away in Lincoln with her husband, Craig, and their 3 kids. When Joan was still around, they used to come up every couple months, mostly for holidays or birthdays. Since she passed, those visits have thinned out like the trees out back in winter. Elise always sounds rushed when she calls. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. How's the heartburn?" As if my entire existence has been reduced to a list of medications and bodily failures. I sometimes wonder if she's afraid I'll say something real. Like, "I miss you," or "I feel invisible." So I don't. I tell her everything's fine. The furnace is working. The mail's on time. I ate soup. I don't think Elise is a bad person. I think she's busy. I think she's tired. Maybe she's scared of watching me fade, the same way I watched her mother slip away 1 chemo drip at a time. Maybe this is just the way people distance themselves from grief, by making you smaller before you're even gone. Easier to pack away. There's an old photograph on the mantel of Elise when she was 7, sitting on my lap with her arms around my neck, both of us laughing at something off camera. I look at that photo every morning when I sit in my recliner with a cup of black coffee that doesn't taste like anything anymore. I can't remember the joke, but I remember how her hands felt, how they clutched me like I was the center of her whole world. I wonder if that little girl would recognize the man I've become. I wonder if she'd be proud, or if she'd cross the room and sit quietly beside me, not saying anything, just being there. That's what I miss most. Presence. Not help, not conversation. Just the weight of someone else in the room, sharing the air. My days are mostly rituals now. I wake up at 6:30, out of habit more than need. I brush my teeth, shave, even though there's no one to see me. I make oatmeal and leave half of it uneaten. I water the same dying fern in the kitchen that Joan brought home from a church sale 15 years ago. I check the locks on the doors, even though crime hasn't touched this street since 1994 when someone stole a mailbox down the block. I sit in my recliner and listen to the ticking of the clock like it's trying to remind me of something. Sometimes I nap. Sometimes I pretend to nap because it's easier than facing the thoughts that come when I'm fully awake. Once a week, a nurse named Carla comes by to check my blood pressure and make sure I haven't fallen in the bathtub. She's kind, but her kindness feels procedural, like it's part of the checklist: pulse, temperature, fake empathy. I don't blame her. I'm sure she sees a dozen old men a week, all of us blurring together in her head. She always says, "You're looking good today, Clarence," and I nod. But inside I think, you wouldn't say that if you looked closer. Every now and then I drive into town to buy groceries I don't really need just so I can stand in line and talk to the cashier. There's a boy named Kevin at the checkout who calls me sir and asks about my truck. That truck is the last thing I've got that still makes me feel like I exist. It's a beat-up '98 Ford with rust on the undercarriage and a heater that only works if you bang the dashboard twice, but it listens when I turn the key. It doesn't forget me. That's more than I can say for most people. I don't tell Elise about these little drives. She'd panic and start talking about assisted living. I know what's coming. I've read between the lines of her emails, the ones that say things like, "Have you ever considered downsizing?" Or, "Craig's mom moved into a wonderful facility with meal service and transportation." As if I'm already packing. As if the choice is made. As if I'm not still here, still lucid, still capable of deciding what walls I want to die between. But lately, something's changed. It's in the silence. In the way Elisa's calls have become shorter, more distracted. In the pauses before she says goodbye. It's in my gut. That old carpenter's instinct that tells you when a beam is about to crack before you hear it snap. Something's coming. I don't know what yet, but I can feel it. And when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to trust the feeling that comes before the storm. Because it's never wrong. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that's so ordinary it doesn't announce itself. The sky was flat and white, not overcast enough for rain but drained of any color. I had just finished rinsing a few dishes in the sink, more out of habit than necessity, when I heard the back door creak open. Elise had a key. She'd insisted on it years ago after Joan's first hospital stay, and though it stung a bit, having someone just walk into my house unannounced, I'd agreed. That's the kind of thing you do for family. You yield. You let them in, even when you're not sure they're coming in for the right reasons. I didn't expect her that day. No call, no message, just the sound of boots on the kitchen linoleum and her voice, brisk and efficient, calling out, "Dad?" as if she were looking for a misplaced coat. I wiped my hands on the towel and stepped out from the hallway, ready to greet her. To offer coffee I knew she'd refuse. To make small talk she didn't really have time for. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, holding the screen door, was Craig, her husband, who hadn't been to this house in over a year. Something about the way they moved, too carefully, too rehearsed, made my stomach shift. Elise smiled too quickly when she saw me, that practiced kind of smile people use when they're trying to soften a blow. Craig avoided my eyes. I asked what brought them out this way, and Elise said, "We were just in the area and thought we'd check in." That was a lie. Nobody is ever just in the area. We live 20 miles from the nearest town, and they both work jobs that tie them to desks and meetings and carpool obligations. People like them don't just stop by. Something was off. I felt it before I knew it. She made tea, which was unusual, and they sat with me in the living room. Not quite comfortable, not quite awkward. They asked how I'd been, how my back was doing, if I needed anything fixed around the house. Craig looked at the ceiling as if judging the condition of the roof, though I'd had it redone just 3 summers ago. They weren't listening to my answers. Their eyes were scanning the room, the corners, the shelves. Elise stared at Joan's photo longer than usual, then looked away like it burned. And then it happened, the thing that changed everything. Elise excused herself to take a call. She stepped out onto the porch and I stayed inside, sipping lukewarm tea and pretending not to be curious. But the wind shifted. The screen door hadn't latched fully. I heard her voice through the gap, clearer than I should have. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. God knows I didn't want to. But once the words came, I couldn't unhear them. "He won't last another month, Craig. We have to be ready. I need you to help me push this through before it gets messy." There was a pause. I stopped breathing. Every sound in the room disappeared except her voice. No, he still seems sharp, but it's not going to last. His memory is slipping. He asked me 3 times what day it was. I think he's starting to lose track. We can't wait until he does something dangerous. The lawyer said if we act now, we can still get the paperwork filed before the new fiscal year. Another pause. Then, softer. We've waited long enough. I don't remember standing up, but I did. I don't remember walking to the door, but my hand was on the knob, shaking. My body had gone cold and hot all at once. My teeth were clenched so tightly my jaw ached. I wanted to fling the door open, to confront her, to ask her what she meant by push this through. But I didn't. I stood there like a coward, like an old man too tired to fight, and I listened to my daughter calculate the end of my life like it was a business deadline. I sat back down before she came in. Craig looked at me briefly, then away. Elise returned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just work stuff," she said. "People can't seem to function without me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She touched my arm and asked if I'd thought about doing a power of attorney just in case. Just in case what, Elise? In case I drop dead before you can liquidate what's left of my life? I told her I'd think about it. She said, "No rush, but it really would be helpful. You know, to have everything in place." They left an hour later. She kissed my cheek, and Craig offered to swing by next week and check the gutters. I nodded again, still playing the fool. Still the accommodating old man who just needed a little help. The second the truck pulled out of the driveway, I sat in my chair and stared at the wall. I didn't cry, not right away. It took a while for the disbelief to burn through the shock. My daughter, my only child, was making plans for my decline. Not just emotionally preparing, not quietly bracing herself, but actively organizing, strategizing, discussing fiscal years and legal permissions and timing. As if my breath, my voice, my presence in this house were just temporary clutter to be managed before the real business of inheritance and disposal began. I thought about Joan. What she'd say, what she'd do. She always saw through Elise's masks quicker than I did. She would have known something was wrong months ago, maybe even years. Maybe I've been blind for a long time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the kitchen window and watched the dark roll in across the fields. I felt something break in me. Not my heart. It wasn't as poetic as that. It was something older, more stubborn. The belief that family will look out for you because you looked out for them. That love repays love. That loyalty has memory. That voice inside me, that belief, cracked like ice on a pond in spring. And in its place came something quieter, colder. Resolve. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the firm realization that if I didn't act soon, they'd write the end of my story without me. They'd put me in a place with a beige hallway and plastic chairs and tell themselves they'd done the right thing. I'd never felt smaller. I'd never felt so alone. But I also knew, then and there, that I wasn't going to let them take my choices away. Not while I still had a voice. Not while I could still stand. Not while there was still fire in me. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I stared at the face I'd grown used to seeing, but rarely studied. The sunken eyes, the liver spots, the furrows that time had carved deep into my skin. I wasn't a vain man, but I took care of myself. Still shaved daily, still buttoned my shirts, still made sure my belt lined up straight. But that morning, I looked different. Not older, emptier. It was as though something had been siphoned out of me overnight. Something essential. I splashed cold water on my face and muttered, "You're still here." But I didn't recognize the sound of my own voice. I spent the next few days moving through routines like a man preparing for a siege. Every sound startled me. The creak of the porch boards, the ring of the landline, the mail truck's engine. I expected another visit, another performance, And it came, right on schedule. 3 days after I overheard Elise's conversation, she showed up again, this time alone. She brought a small bag of groceries, canned soup, crackers, orange juice, all things I didn't ask for, didn't need. Her smile was tighter, her movements more deliberate. I watched her eyes scan the living room like she was checking for changes, inventorying me. We sat in the kitchen. She said, "Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something important," and I felt the back of my neck tighten. I nodded, sipped my coffee. She folded her hands on the table like a schoolteacher and said, "I've been thinking a lot about how we can make things easier for you, especially if anything ever happens." She said it softly, like a nurse trying to explain a terminal diagnosis to a child. I didn't interrupt. She continued, explaining that it was time to consider next steps, that she and Craig had looked into some things, that they'd found a legal service that could help me transition financial authority in case I ever became unable to make decisions. She was choosing her words carefully, but the meaning wasn't lost on me. They wanted control. They wanted to preemptively occupy my life before I had the chance to defend it. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You think I'm losing it, don't you?" She blinked. "No, Dad, it's not about that. It's just that things can change fast and it's good to be prepared." Prepared for what? My death? My collapse? My mind turning into fog? She pulled a folder from her purse and slid it across the table. "These are just forms to review. Power of attorney. Durable healthcare proxy. It's not urgent, but I think it would give all of us peace of mind." I didn't touch the folder. I just stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. Because it was. Signing those papers would be the beginning of my erasure, the final legal stripping of my independence. I remembered what I'd overheard on the porch. "He won't last another month." Those words echoed through the room like a draft under a closed door. I told her I'd think about it, that I appreciated her concern. She smiled, relieved, mistaking my calm for cooperation. I watched her tuck the folder neatly back into her bag, already sure she'd get what she wanted. She kissed me on the forehead as she left. A gesture that once meant love now felt like a placeholder for the goodbye she was trying to make easier for herself. After she left, I opened the drawer by the sink and pulled out Joan's old notepad, the one she used to keep grocery lists on. I wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. "Call the lawyer." The next morning, I drove to town. My truck rattled more than usual, but I made it, parked in front of the law office that had helped me with Joan's will years ago. Same secretary, same linoleum floor. The lawyer, Mr. Haskins, had aged but not softened. I told him I needed to update some documents. When he asked what kind, I said, all of them. We spent 2 hours going through every detail, my will, the title of the house, bank accounts, insurance policies. I told him I wanted to revoke the previous healthcare proxy Elise had helped me set up after Joan died. I wanted full control retained solely by me, with no succession plan in place. I wanted a clause added to my will that specified no family member was to be involved in financial decision-making unless I explicitly named them, which I would not. Mr. Haskins didn't ask why. He just nodded. He'd seen this before, probably more times than he cared to admit. Before I left, I asked him quietly, "Can someone try to override this if they think I'm mentally unfit?" He gave me a long look, then said, "Only with a court order and a mountain of evidence. But if that day ever comes, Clarence, give me a call first. We'll be ready." That night, I slept for the first time in a week. Not soundly, but enough to feel the weight shift a little off my chest. I hadn't stopped the train, but I'd switched the tracks. For now. Elise called 2 days later. "Did you have a chance to look over the papers?" I told her I was still thinking. She said, "No pressure, but sooner is better." I told her I understood. We said goodbye, but this time I didn't say, "love you," at the end. I wasn't sure I still did. I began noticing small changes after that. She'd send me texts in the middle of the day asking what I'd eaten, whether I'd taken my meds. Once, she called to remind me to put the trash out, even though pickup wasn't for another 2 days. It was subtle, but it wasn't kindness. It was surveillance. I knew it now. I saw it clearly. The slow erosion of independence masked as concern. Craig showed up unannounced the following weekend. He claimed to be in the area again and asked if I needed anything fixed. I told him the house was fine. He lingered, looked at the boiler, asked about my sleep. I said I slept like a rock. He smiled, but there was something behind his eyes, frustration, maybe, like a man whose plan wasn't going quite fast enough. A week later, I got a call from a woman named Janet. She said she was from the Elder Support Network in Lincoln and that Elise had reached out about long-term housing options for me. I sat very still. I asked Janet how far along those conversations had gone. She said Elise had asked for brochures and pricing. I thanked her and hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from fury. They weren't even waiting for me to lose it. They were preemptively moving me like a piece on a board, like a liability to be contained. It wasn't about my safety. It was about their convenience. I stood in the hallway that night looking at the photos on the wall. Elise's graduation, her wedding, Joan holding our granddaughter for the first time. These images didn't comfort me anymore. They accused me. They whispered, "You raised her. You gave her the tools. You taught her how to think. This is what she's doing with it." I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a whiskey, something I hadn't done in years, and sat down with the notepad again. I wrote a new word this time. Watch. If they thought I was too old to see what was happening, they'd underestimated me. I wasn't going to stop them yet. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted them to reveal themselves fully. And then, when the time was right, I would act, and I would do it in a way they'd never forget. It was a Thursday when the final confirmation came, the kind that removes all doubt, even the sliver of hope you secretly cling to without admitting it. The morning was cool, gray again, the sky like old dishwater. I had just come in from checking the mailbox, which was empty except for a glossy flyer about a funeral insurance plan with large, bold letters that read, "Make your exit easy." I stared at it longer than I should have, then crumpled it without, reading the rest. Inside, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the radio on low, and opened the local paper. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels more like warning than peace. I didn't expect the phone call that came. I didn't expect to recognize the voice. "Mr. Turner, this is Carla, from Dr. Lively's office. Your daughter asked us to send over your most recent health records to a specialist for review. Is that all right with you?" My hand stiffened around the mug. I said nothing at first. The nurse on the line hesitated, then repeated herself. "A specialist?" I asked, careful with the word. "Yes," she said brightly. "A geriatric cognitive assessment specialist. It's just standard, nothing alarming. She said you were having memory lapses and some confusion with dates." I sat very still. "Did she give examples?" I asked. "She mentioned you forgot where your keys were a few times and once repeated a story twice in the same day." I closed my eyes. I remembered that story. It was about the time Joan and I got caught in the rain at the county fair, both of us soaked to the skin but laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. It wasn't confusion. It was affection. I told it twice because I wanted to feel her close again. I told the nurse I didn't authorize any specialist. I told her I was rescinding all outside medical sharing unless I signed for it myself. She stammered an apology and said she'd make a note in the file. I hung up before she could say anything else. That was the moment. The moment something shifted from suspicion to certainty. Elise wasn't just circling. She had begun her descent, quietly, politely, under the guise of care. She was building a case, one paper at a time, one anecdote at a time, one gentle distortion at a time. And I understood then that she wasn't just hoping to prepare for the future. She was trying to manufacture it. I stood at the sink, the coffee untouched, and felt something rise in me. Not panic, not sorrow, but the steel edge of anger that comes when betrayal isn't a sudden strike but a slow, steady hollowing out. They were setting the stage. They wanted a diagnosis, not because it would help me, but because it would clear the legal path for what they had already decided, that my house, my money, my life, everything I'd spent a lifetime building, was now theirs to manage, control, and eventually dismantle. I needed to know how far they'd go, and to do that, I needed to give them room. So I made a decision. I began to play the role they had already cast me in. I started leaving things slightly out of place, left the oven mitt in the freezer, misplaced a few bills, called Carla and asked her to bring me the same medication twice, knowing she'd report it. When Elise called, I paused between words a little too long, pretended to forget the name of a neighbor. She began speaking slower, like I was hard of hearing. I let her. A week later, she came by again with Craig. They brought store-brand lasagna and a bottle of low-sodium juice. We sat in the living room while Craig checked the water heater in the basement, uninvited. Elise sat beside me and asked how I'd been sleeping. "Pretty well," I said, "though sometimes I wake up and think it's 1987 again." Her eyes lit up with concern, the kind that's not about you, but about the story she can now tell someone else. She leaned in. "Dad, I really think we should move forward on that paperwork. It's just a precaution." She smiled, but her hand gripped my arm too hard. "We're just trying to protect you," she added, and I almost laughed. "Protect me? From what? From myself? Or from the inconvenience of me still being here, unprocessed?" I nodded slowly. "You're probably right," I said. "Bring whatever you need next time." Her relief was visible. She exhaled, leaned back, and said, "Good. I'll schedule the notary." That night, I drove to the post office and sent 2 copies of my new documents to my lawyer. One sealed with a red tab marked, "Only open if challenged." I sent a third to an old friend of Joan's, a woman named Miriam, who had served as witness during the probate of Joan's will. She had offered once, years ago, to be called if I ever needed someone to vouch for my soundness. I hoped she still meant it. Back at home, I looked around the living room. I took a slow walk through the house, touching things. The banister Joan had painted, the kitchen drawer that stuck, the corner of the wall where Elise had once carved her initials by accident with a hairpin. This wasn't just a house, it was the architecture of memory. And they wanted it gone. Neat and finalized. Flattened into paperwork and proceeds. The next day I sat on the porch swing, watching the wind play in the cornfield across the road. A squirrel darted along the fence line. The silence was deep. It was the kind of silence I used to share with Joan, where nothing needed to be said. Now it pressed down on me, heavier with every hour. Not because I was alone, I'd made my peace with solitude, but because now I was alone against something. Something dressed in the clothes of love. Something pretending to be help while plotting the extraction of my very life before it had even left my body. And yet, through the tightening grip of what they thought was coming, I felt strangely clear. They had shown their hand. They had revealed the story they were trying to write, but they had forgotten one thing. I still held the pen. I wasn't going to sign a damn thing. A week later, Elise arrived with a different tone in her voice. Not the soft, manipulative persuasion she usually coated her words with, but a cooler, crisper cadence, like a person who has grown impatient with pretending. She didn't come alone. This time she brought a woman named Denise, who introduced herself as a legal coordinator. Not quite a lawyer, not quite a notary, just vague enough to feel suspicious. Denise had a clipboard, a stack of forms, and an expression like she'd done this exact thing 100 times before. Elise bustled around the living room like it belonged to her, adjusting pillows, clearing off the coffee table without asking, moving aside Joan's old photo like it was in the way of progress. She told me we'd just need a quick signature today, that the rest could be finalized remotely. And she spoke like someone narrating a process that had already been agreed upon, as if I'd signed in my sleep and just forgotten. I sat very still in my recliner watching her mouth move without really hearing the words, because behind her, through the open hallway, I could see Craig in the guest bedroom, measuring things with a tape. I watched him make a note on his phone, then check the window frame, then test the closet hinges. He was inventorying. He was calculating. He was making sure everything could be packed and sold quickly. My chest went tight. I looked back at Elise, who had now moved closer, gesturing toward the legal forms as Denise stood silently by, waiting for my compliance. The room felt colder than it had a minute before. Elise's voice dipped into the same falsely gentle register I had once heard her use when explaining to her son why their dog wasn't coming back from the vet. "It's just a little paperwork, Dad," she said. "You're not giving anything up. It's just peace of mind for all of us." I reached for my glasses slowly, like an old man worn down by fatigue, and looked at the top sheet. Durable power of attorney, financial control, transfer of medical proxy, release of rights in event of cognitive decline. It was all there, a silent, typed coup d'etat of my existence. I asked without raising my voice if Elise had spoken to my lawyer. She hesitated, then said, "We figured you'd want to avoid unnecessary legal costs." Denise smiled at that. I smiled too, not out of amusement, but because in that moment I saw exactly who they were. Not monsters, not villains. Just entitled, just strategic, just hollow people doing what hollow people do when love has been replaced with narrative. I looked at Denise, then at Elise, and said, "I'll need a minute." "Bathroom." I stood slowly, as if stiff, shuffled down the hall, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the office. I opened the top drawer of Joan's old desk, pulled out the small voice recorder I'd purchased 2 weeks earlier at the drugstore, and slid it into the pocket of my cardigan. I returned to the living room and sat down. I leaned back in the recliner, sighed, looked at the paperwork again, then said, "Why don't you walk me through it one more time, just so I understand?" Elise brightened. She thought she'd won. Denise nodded and began explaining. I let them talk for 22 uninterrupted minutes, recording every word, every veiled justification, every mention of how the house would be better managed in our name, and how accessing your retirement fund now could help us avoid probate. Complications later. Craig came back in halfway through and added, "We're just trying to take the burden off you, Clarence." He used my first name like a bank officer. When they finished, I stood again, said I was feeling tired, and walked them to the door. Elise kissed me on the cheek with a strange finality. Denise smiled thinly. Craig shook my hand like a man who had just bought a used car. That night I transferred the audio file to a USB drive and locked it in the back of my safe with my updated will. Then I made 2 copies and mailed them. One to my lawyer, one to Miriam. The next day, I called Carla, my nurse, and asked her casually if she'd received any new instructions from my daughter. She paused, then admitted Elise had requested a daily health check, citing early signs of Alzheimer's. I thanked her, hung up, then unplugged the landline. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. I got a letter from a memory clinic in Lincoln, requesting that I confirm my appointment for a baseline cognitive evaluation. There had been no consultation, no consent. I called the number, canceled it, and asked them to remove my name from their records. They said they'd need family approval. I said they'd need a court order. I hung up. Then I called my lawyer and gave him a full briefing. He told me to remain calm. He said I had done everything right. He told me not to engage further unless they made a legal move. I agreed, but something inside me itched. I couldn't just sit back and wait. So I gave them what they wanted, or rather, what they thought they wanted. Over the next week, I started making small, visible errors. I poured orange juice into my cereal in front of Elise during a visit. I wore mismatched shoes to the mailbox. I left my keys in the fridge. All intentional, all rehearsed. Each time I watched her eyes widen just a little, watched her note something mentally. Craig even started taking photos of the house, the mail piling up, the dishes not done. None of it accidental. I gave them a show. I played the role they were dying for me to collapse into. And then I sat quietly and watched as they built their case on it. But what they didn't know was that every performance was documented. Every action filmed with a small hidden camera installed in the mantel clock, every conversation recorded by a second device in the bookshelf. All time-stamped, all dated, all narrated in the margins of my notebook each night. And while they were building a case for my decline, I was building a case for their deception. Then came the final insult. I received a letter, not from Elise, not from Craig, but from an elder care attorney representing concerned family members petitioning for guardianship rights. They were trying to take full legal control. It was official now. No more pretending. No more veiled concern. They were making their move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I called my lawyer. We met the next morning and assembled the full file. The documents, the recordings, the testimony, everything. Then we filed a counter-motion, preemptive protection of assets, testimony of sound mental capacity from a neutral physician, and a declaration of familial coercion. It was legal war now, and I was not going to lose. I waited a week before telling Elise I knew. She called to check in. I told her calmly that I'd be declining all further assistance, that I was aware of the guardianship motion, and that my legal team would be handling all future communication. There was silence on the line. Then a bitter voice. "So, that's how it is?" I said nothing. She hung up. That was the last time she called me. For 3 days I didn't leave the house. I sat by the window waiting to see if they'd show up again. They didn't. Then, one morning, the truck arrived. Not Craig's, a moving company. 2 men stepped out and knocked, said they were sent by Elise to begin preparatory staging. I smiled and handed them a restraining order. They left. Now the house is quiet again. But not hollow. Not anymore. Now, every room feels like a reclaimed part of myself. Every step I take echoes with my own decision. They tried to strip me bare, tried to rewrite my ending, but I stood in their way. And when the storm came, I didn't run. I documented. I waited. And then I struck. It was the day the notary was supposed to come that I decided to end it. Elise had texted me 2 nights before with the exact time. "We'll be there at 11 a.m. Thursday with the notary and Craig. It'll just take 20 minutes. We'll bring lunch." So casual, so transactional. As if this was just another item on her schedule between picking up dry cleaning and helping her daughter with homework. She hadn't asked if I agreed to the meeting, hadn't even tried to phrase it as a question. The arrogance of assumption bled through every word. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already made my preparations. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table, Joan's old table, the one with the notch in the corner where Elise had once knocked her head as a toddler and wailed until we gave her a strawberry popsicle to distract her. That same daughter was now on her way to legally dissolve my autonomy like a corporation in decline. The house was silent. The sun had gone down hours ago, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of crickets who didn't know or care about betrayal. On the table sat a folder, thick, heavy, methodically assembled. Inside was every document, every recording, every notarized affidavit and physician's report, and a signed statement from my attorney attesting to my full cognitive and legal capacity, time-stamped and certified. I slid that folder into a leather case and placed it on the living room mantel. Then I sat in my chair and waited for sleep, which didn't come. The next morning, I dressed in my Sunday suit, the one I hadn't worn since Joan's funeral, and I combed my hair slowly, deliberately, like a man preparing to face something final. At 10:52, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't move from the chair. I just listened as car doors opened and closed. Laughter. The sound of Elise's heels on the porch. The notary, a man in a brown jacket and glasses too large for his face, looked startled when I opened the door and said, "Right on time." Craig gave me a tight smile, the kind men give before they attempt something they know might backfire. Elise breezed in like she owned the place, set her purse down on the table, and pulled out a folder. "This shouldn't take long," she said brightly. I nodded and said, "I agree." They all sat. The notary unfolded his paperwork, began to explain the procedure, but I held up my hand. "Before we begin," I said, "I have something for you to review." I stood, walked slowly to the mantel, picked up the leather case, and placed it on the table. Elise frowned. Craig shifted. The notary looked confused. "What's this?" Elise asked. I looked her in the eye. "It's a full account of your actions over the past 3 months," I said, "including recordings, medical testimony, and legal certification of my current mental state." She blinked. The notary paused mid-pen stroke. "What are you talking about?" she said. I sat down and folded my hands. "I know about the appointment you tried to schedule without my consent. I know about the emails to the elder care attorney. I know about the calls to Carla, the attempt to initiate guardianship proceedings, and the unauthorized communication with financial institutions. I have it all documented." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Craig leaned forward. "Dad, you're being paranoid," he said. I turned to him. "Don't speak. You're not family to me anymore." He went quiet. Elise's voice cracked. "We were just trying to help you," she said. "You weren't well. You were leaving the stove on, forgetting dates." I cut her off. "Number, I wasn't. I was testing you." Silence fell like a bomb. Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I leaned back. "I staged everything. Every mistake. Every slip. Every moment of supposed confusion. And you fell for it. You exploited it. You rushed to control, to claim, to confiscate. You didn't check in with love. You checked out with greed." The notary sat frozen, his pen in midair. "I don't understand," he said. I turned to him. "You don't have to, but you might want to reconsider notarizing anything today, unless you'd like to be part of a coercion complaint." Elise stood up. "This is insane," she said. "You're sick. You need help." I stood too. "No, Elise. You need help. You need to understand that what you've done is not just unethical, it's criminal, and it ends now." I picked up the folder, pulled out a single page, and handed it to the notary. "That is a legal notification of revocation of all prior documents with my daughter's name. It has been filed and notarized already. You may keep that copy for your records." He looked at it, then at me, then at her. Elise sank back into her chair. "You don't mean this," she said, her voice small. "You're angry, but you'll forgive me." I walked to the window, opened it, and let the air in. Then I turned back to her. "You want to know what Joan said to me the night before she died?" She didn't answer. She said, "Don't let them turn you into a shell of yourself. Keep your dignity. That's what makes you Clarence." I looked down at my shoes, and I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Elise stood. "So that's it? You're cutting me out?" I met her eyes. "You already cut yourself out. I'm just signing the paperwork." Craig opened his mouth again, but Elise grabbed his arm. "Let's go," she said. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not guilt, fear, not fear of me, fear of herself, of what she'd become. They left, the door shut. The house was quiet. And for the first time in months, I exhaled. The days after were quieter than I expected, not just in the house, but inside myself. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no victory lap, no swelling music in the background, just a silence that felt more honest than anything I'd heard in months. I watched the sun move across the kitchen tiles like I used to watch Joan braid her hair in the morning, with patience, reverence, and a strange sense of loss for something that was still right in front of me. Elise didn't call. Craig didn't text. The lawyer confirmed they hadn't contested the revocation. It was over. Not just the legal skirmish, but the relationship as I knew it. Something had broken that could not be glued back with apologies or well-rehearsed guilt. I didn't tell anyone, not even Miriam. I didn't need comfort. I needed air. I opened the windows of the house and let in the late autumn chill. The wind moved through the rooms like a guest, clearing out the last traces of performance, manipulation, and fear. I walked from room to room and touched things slowly. Not with grief this time, but with ownership. Real ownership. Not of property, but of self. I was no longer being watched, no longer being assessed, judged, or diagrammed into future estate allocations. I was simply a man again. An old man, yes, but whole. 3 weeks later, I packed a single suitcase and drove myself to a small cabin 3 counties over that I used to rent with Joan during pheasant season. It was musty, untouched, a little crooked in the doorframe, but it felt like memory instead of strategy. I spent 3 days there, reading the same old Western novels I used to mock but secretly loved. I drank tea. I fed birds. I made peace with the fact that I had a daughter, but I didn't have a family anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was safer. You don't get ambushed by people who are already honest about their absence. When I came home, I found a single envelope on the porch. No postage, just my name in Elise's handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, 2 pages long. She wrote that she never intended harm, that she was only trying to protect me from the inevitable, that she didn't know how to deal with the slow erosion of a parent, and that maybe she'd panicked. She didn't apologize, not truly. She asked if I would reconsider talking. She signed it, love, always. But I didn't feel love in those words. I felt calculation trying to cloak itself in remorse. And more than that, I felt tired. I placed the letter in Joan's recipe box and didn't respond. Some things don't need confrontation. Some things only need to be outlived. Now, the house is cleaner. I've moved some furniture around. I've given away things I no longer need and brought down old photographs I hadn't looked at in years. The photo of Elise as a child remains, but it faces the wall now. I don't hate her. I don't think I ever will. But I no longer confuse biology with loyalty. And that's a clarity I wish I'd had years earlier. I speak more now, not to people, but to the walls, the wind, to Joan. I tell her what happened. I ask if she knew it would turn out like this. I imagine her shaking her head, not in shock, but in sadness. She always warned me that love without boundaries is an invitation for erosion. I see it now. I feel it. But I also survived it, and I still have my name, my story, my voice. No one will write my ending for me. Not Elise, not time, not even death. When I go, and yes, it will be soon enough, I will go as Clarence Turner. Not as someone's burden, not as someone's bank account, not as a man pre-signed into silence. Just Clarence, just a man, still standing, still whole.